The suitcase hit the dirt with a sound like a gavel striking wood, final and irreversible, and Ada Donnelly stood in the middle of the road with Owen Sheridan's hand locked around her wrist like a shackle made of iron in desperation. "You are not getting on that stage," he said, and his voice was low, rough, stripped of everything except the raw truth underneath it. And Ada had never heard a man sound like that before, like every word cost him something he could not afford to lose. "Let go of me, Owen." She did not look at him. She stared at the stagecoach sitting in front of the Millhaven depot, horses stamping impatiently in the August heat, the driver watching from under the brim of a sweat-stained hat with the blank expression of a man who had seen this scene before and would see it again. "I came to this town with one suitcase. I am leaving with that same suitcase and nothing more. Ada," his grip did not loosen. "If you get on that coach, you are walking into a trap. Harlan Voss is in Abilene. He knows you are coming. Whatever he told you in that letter, it is a lie. It has always been a lie. And everything he has ever promised you was designed to bring you to a place where he controls you completely." She turned to look at him then because she could not help it, and that was her first mistake. His face was devastated. Not angry, not commanding, not the hard, unreadable face of the rancher who had looked at her with suspicion the first day she walked into Millhaven, Texas, on a Wednesday in the spring of 1882, with the sun burning the back of her neck, and a suitcase full of secrets she had not yet told a single soul. He looked like a man watching something precious fall from a height too great to survive. "You don't know what he told me," she said. "He told you your brother is alive." Owen's jaw tightened. "He told you Caleb is in Abilene and that if you come alone, he will take you to him. And he told you not to tell anyone, especially not me." The blood drained from her face. She heard the sound of the wind moving through the dry grass at the edge of town, the distant bark of a dog, the clank of a harness buckle, the whole ordinary world proceeding around the edge of the most important moment of her life. "How did you know that?" she whispered. "Because Harlan Voss has used that exact lie before." Owen released her wrist. He did not step back. He stood close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, the one he had never fully explained, and his eyes were the color of deep water in a sunlit well. "He used it on my sister, and she got on a stage just like that one. And she never came back." The stagecoach driver cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we are leaving in 2 minutes." Ada looked at the suitcase in the dirt. She looked at the coach. She looked at Owen Sheridan, who was not asking her to stay for his own sake, who was standing in the road with his hat in his hand, and everything he felt for her written plainly across his face. And she thought about the morning she had arrived in Millhaven with nothing but that one suitcase and a story full of holes. And she thought about how none of this was supposed to happen, how she was not supposed to stay, not supposed to fall into the rhythms of this small, sun-baked town, not supposed to let anyone matter. "Tell me," she said, "tell me everything, right now before that coach leaves. Tell me everything about Harlan Voss and your sister, and then I will decide." Owen Sheridan looked at her for a long moment, and then he picked up her suitcase from the dirt. "Then come with me," he said, "and I will tell you all of it." It had been 4 months earlier when Ada Donnelly had first stepped off the westbound Texas and Pacific Railway in Millhaven, with the dust of 1,000 miles on her boots, and a story she had constructed so carefully that she almost believed it herself. She had told the station master she was a teacher looking for work. She had told Mrs. Pruitt at the boarding house that she had come from Georgia, which was close enough to the truth to be comfortable. She had not told anyone that her real name was the only thing she had left that was entirely her own, or that the suitcase contained 3 dresses, a carpetbag full of correspondence she should have burned, a small Derringer pistol that had belonged to her father, and a newspaper clipping about a man named Harlan Voss that she had read so many times the paper was wearing thin at the folds. Millhaven in the spring of 1882 was a town that smelled like cattle and ambition, like the sweat of men who had come to Texas, because the East had run out of room for their particular brand of hope. It had a main street wide enough for 2 wagons to pass, a general store, a saloon called the Blue Star that operated behind a set of louvered doors and a pretense of respectability, a church whose pastor preached with the ferocity of a man convinced the devil had a specific interest in West Texas, a school with 12 students and a teacher who had recently departed to marry a cattle buyer in Fort Worth, and a land office where disputes were settled on paper and occasionally behind it. There was also, at the southern edge of town on a road that turned to red clay in the wet season, the beginning of the road that led to the Sheridan Ranch, which everyone in Millhaven referred to simply as the Sheridan Place, the way you refer to a landmark so established that its name has become its nature. Ada had not expected to encounter Owen Sheridan on her first full day in Millhaven. She had been inside the general store of a man named Mr. Bledsoe, inquiring about the open teaching position, when the door had opened behind her, and a man had come in with the sort of physical presence that reorganizes a room simply by entering it. He was tall and broad-shouldered, somewhere in his early 30s, with dark hair showing the first hint of silver at the temples, and the kind of face that had been weathered by outdoor living into something more interesting than mere handsomeness. He was not conventionally gentle-looking. There were lines around his eyes from squinting into sun and distance, and his hands, when he placed them on the counter to collect a box of supplies, were the hands of someone who worked hard and did not apologize for it. He had looked at Ada with an expression of direct, unguarded assessment that she found both irritating and oddly refreshing after months of men who looked at her sideways or not at all. "You are the new school teacher," he said. It was not quite a question. "I am interviewing for the position," she said, matching his directness. "I have not been hired yet." "You will be," he said, with the confidence of a man who had found that his assessments were usually correct. "Millhaven has been without a teacher for 6 weeks and the children are becoming feral. I am Owen Sheridan." Ada Donnelly. He had nodded, collected his supplies, and left. She had watched him go with a feeling she could not immediately name, and then turned back to Mr. Bledsoe, who was already explaining the modest salary that the town offered its school teacher, and the use of the small house behind the schoolhouse, and Ada had said yes to all of it because she needed to be in Millhaven, and she needed a reason to stay, and a classroom full of children asking questions she could answer was infinitely preferable to the questions other people might start asking her if she lingered with no visible purpose. She had been hired that afternoon and had begun teaching the following Monday. The school itself was a one-room building with 8 windows that let in excellent light on clear days and drafts of cold air on the days when the wind came down from the north, with its particular Texas intensity. There were 12 students ranging in age from 6 to 14, and they came from ranching families and farming families and the families of the men who ran the town's services. And they were, as Owen Sheridan had predicted, in various stages of academic wildness. Ada had spent the first week establishing order with the patient firmness of a woman who had survived things that made a room full of unruly children seem entirely manageable. By the 3rd week, she had the classroom running to a schedule. By the 4th week, she knew each child's particular strength and particular gap in their learning. And by the end of the 1st month, she had begun to understand Millhaven in the way that only comes from watching its children, from hearing which names made them anxious and which made them light up, from learning whose father drank and whose mother was sick, and who walked 3 miles each way without complaint, and who came to school hungry more often than not. She learned from various small comments and asides that Owen Sheridan had a niece named Pearl who attended the school, that Pearl was 9 years old and exceptionally bright, and that Pearl lived with her uncle because her mother, Owen's sister, had died 4 years ago under circumstances that the adults in Millhaven discussed only in careful, lowered voices. Ada had noted this, filed it alongside the newspaper clipping in the back of her mind where she kept things that might matter later, and had focused on teaching Pearl long division with the kind of steady encouragement that Pearl, who had been told by her previous teacher that girls did not need to understand advanced arithmetic, accepted with a fierce and grateful intensity. It was Pearl who reintroduced Owen Sheridan into Ada's daily life. She came to school one Thursday in early May with a note from her uncle asking if the teacher would be willing to meet with him to discuss Pearl's progress, and Ada had written back a polite confirmation for the following Saturday morning, and had spent the intervening days telling herself firmly that this was a routine parent-teacher conference of the sort she would conduct with any guardian, which was entirely true, and had nothing whatsoever to do with the fact that she had found herself thinking about Owen Sheridan with an inconvenient frequency that she preferred not to examine too closely. He arrived at the schoolhouse at 10 in the morning, punctual to the minute, and took off his hat when he came inside, and Ada showed him Pearl's work with the professional clarity of a teacher who is very good at her job, and he listened with the focused attention of a man who takes seriously the things he is responsible for. "She is exceptional," Ada said, spreading Pearl's most recent arithmetic exercises on the desk between them. "She thinks in patterns. She is not just memorizing methods, she is understanding principles. I would like to give her additional material if you will permit it." Owen studied the papers. Something moved behind his eyes, some private emotion he kept contained. "Her mother was the same way," he said quietly. "Maggie could do sums in her head faster than most men could do them on paper." He paused. "She would have liked knowing Pearl is doing well." Ada did not push into the grief he had offered her a glimpse of. She redirected professionally to the question of additional textbooks, and Owen agreed to order whatever she recommended from the catalog, and the meeting should have ended there. It did not end there because Ada, setting the papers into a neat stack, knocked her carpetbag from the corner of the desk where it had been sitting, and it fell open on the floor, and the newspaper clipping fell out along with everything else. She moved fast, faster than she should have, to gather everything up, and the speed of her movement made Owen glance down, and he saw it. Not the headline, she did not think he saw the headline, but he saw her reaction, the flash of something she could not control, the way her hands moved with an urgency that was not proportionate to a spilled bag. He did not say anything. He crouched to help her pick up the scattered items with the automatic courtesy of a man raised to help, and handed her back the things that had spilled farthest from her reach, and did not look at her with the careful blankness he maintained for the next several minutes while she regained her composure and concluded the meeting with seamless professionalism. But when he reached the door, he turned back. "Miss Donnelly," he said, "Millhaven is a small town with a long memory. If you are here for a reason beyond teaching, I would rather know it plainly than discover it sideways." She looked at him steadily. "I am here to teach your niece and 11 other children long division, and the history of this republic and the correct spelling of words they will need for the rest of their lives. That is the only reason I am here, Mr. Sheridan." He held her gaze for a beat longer than was comfortable, and then he nodded once, put his hat on, and left. She stood alone in the schoolroom for a long time afterward, and she did not allow herself to feel afraid. The problem with hidden motives in small towns is that the town itself becomes complicit in them. You cannot keep a secret in a place where everyone knows which wagon tracks belong to which wheels, where the postmaster reads the postmarks on letters with the same attention a physician gives a pulse, where gossip functions as a community utility, reliable and constant and impossible to shut off. Ada was careful. She was meticulous in her carefulness. She collected her mail from the post office at odd hours. She read her private correspondence in the schoolhouse with the door latched. She conducted herself at every public occasion with the gentle, slightly remote pleasantness of a woman who is cordial but does not invite confidences. She participated in the Wednesday afternoon sewing circle at Mrs. Pruitt's boarding house because not participating would have been more conspicuous than the alternative. She attended Sunday services. She joined the committee that was raising funds for new textbooks for the school. She was visible and pleasant and entirely unremarkable. The problem was Owen Sheridan. He had a habit of appearing at the edges of her life in ways that were entirely innocent and entirely disruptive. He came to collect Pearl from school on Fridays when he had business in town, and he would stand at the fence that bordered the schoolyard with his arms crossed and his hat tilted back just enough to suggest he was not trying to look formal, and Ada would be aware of him the way you are aware of a change in weather, without needing to look directly at the sky. He sat 2 pews behind her at Sunday services, and she could feel the specific attention of his presence the way you feel the warmth of a fire without turning toward it. He did not pursue her. He did not flirt with her. He was perfectly, correctly respectful. But there was something in the way he watched, in the quality of his attention, that told her he was still thinking about what he had seen that morning in the schoolhouse, still turning over the question he had asked, still waiting, with the patient steadiness of a rancher who understood that the things worth waiting for could not be rushed. In late May, there was a dance at the Millhaven Town Hall to celebrate the anniversary of the town's founding, and Ada attended because Mrs. Prout told her it would be peculiar if she did not, and she wore the best of her 3 dresses, which was a deep blue calico that had been serviceable when she bought it and was still serviceable now. And she danced twice with the school board chairman and once with Mr. Bledsoe from the general store, and was careful to be pleasant and visible and entirely unremarkable. Owen Sheridan arrived late with Pearl, who was wearing her Sunday dress and was vibrating with the particular excitement of a 9-year-old, permitted to stay up past her usual bedtime. He settled Pearl with the other children near the dessert table and then stood at the edge of the room, and Ada made the mistake of glancing at him at the exact moment he glanced at her, and something in the exchange was too direct and too long to be accidental. He crossed the room with a deliberateness that made several people near Ada find reasons to look elsewhere. "Miss Donnelly," he said, "may I have this dance?" She could have declined. She had a number of socially acceptable reasons available. But the music was a waltz, played by the fiddle player who came through Millhaven every month, and it was warm in the hall, and Owen Sheridan was looking at her with that direct, unguarded expression that she was beginning to understand was simply how he looked at things that mattered to him, and Ada Donnelly had not danced in over a year. "Yes," she said, "you may." He danced the way he did most things, with serious attention and no wasted motion. His hand was warm and sure at her waist, and he was close enough that she could smell the outdoors on him, sun and grass and leather, and he did not try to charm her with conversation. He simply danced with her, and the silence between them was not uncomfortable. "You are a good dancer," she said, "because silence can only be its own safe harbor for so long." "My sister taught me," he said. "She said a man who cannot dance is only half useful at a party." She heard the past tense land. "You miss her very much." "Every day," he said simply. "Pearl is the best of her, which makes Pearl a lot to be grateful for." Ada studied his face as they turned through the pattern of the dance. "What happened to her?" she asked. "If you are willing to tell me." His jaw tightened just slightly. "A man came through here 4 years ago, told her he was a land developer, that he was looking for investors in a new settlement, that he had opportunities for smart women who understood business. Maggie was exactly that kind of woman. She went to meet him in Abilene to discuss terms." He paused. "We found out later that his name was not what he had given her. That he had done the same thing in 3 other towns. That he took money from women who trusted him and left them with nothing, or worse." Ada's heart was moving faster in her chest. What was worse? Maggie got sick on the road. "We think the water at the station was bad, or it might have been something he did. We never proved it. She died before she reached Abilene. The driver brought her back." His voice was flat and controlled in the way of someone who has had to be flat and controlled about the same story enough times that the control itself has become a kind of grief. "The man who called himself a developer was never found. Different name every time, different state, same pattern." "And the man's real name?" Ada asked, keeping her voice entirely steady. Owen looked at her. "I have theories," he said carefully, "but the name I have heard most often connected to men who operate like that is Voss, Harlan Voss." The music continued. They continued to dance. Ada did not miss a single step. "I am sorry about your sister," she said, and she meant it completely and without reservation in a way that had nothing to do with the newspaper clipping in her carpetbag and everything to do with the look on Owen Sheridan's face. "Thank you," he said, and something in the way he said it told her he could feel that she meant it. They finished the dance. He returned her to the edge of the room. Pearl came running with a plate of cake and an expression of 9-year-old delight, and the moment dissolved back into the ordinary texture of the evening. But Ada lay awake that night in her room at the boarding house and stared at the ceiling and thought about the name Harlan Voss, which was the same name on the newspaper clipping in her carpetbag, which was the same name in the letter she had received from a man in Abilene 3 weeks before, which was the man she had come to Millhaven to find. She had come to find Harlan Voss because he had destroyed her family. Her brother Caleb had been 19 when he had encountered a man in Augusta, Georgia, who called himself a legitimate businessman with interests in Texas land development. Caleb had been young and ambitious and desperate for a way to make something of himself, and the man, who gave his name as Harlan Graves, had offered him exactly the kind of opportunity that looks, to a young man of limited experience, like a door opening onto everything he has wanted. Caleb had invested what money their family had convinced their father to add more, had borrowed against the family house to meet the minimum that Graves required. And then Graves, who was Voss, had taken the money and vanished. Their father had died within the year. Heart failure, the doctor said, but Ada had always thought it was simpler and more brutal than a medical term could contain. He had died of shame and defeat, and the specific grief of a man who had trusted his son and lost everything. Caleb had disappeared 6 months after that, unable to bear the weight of what had happened, leaving Ada with a house she could not pay for, a grief she could not share with anyone, and a fury so cold and persistent that it had become the organizing principle of her life. She had spent 2 years following the trail of the man who had various names and one consistent pattern. She had found evidence in Georgia, in Alabama, in Mississippi, and then the trail had led west into Texas, where Harlan Voss operated with a confidence that suggested he did not expect anyone to follow him this far. She had come to Millhaven because it was the last town on the route she had traced, the last town where she had concrete evidence of his presence, and because she needed to be somewhere long enough to build the kind of case that a territorial judge could not dismiss, and because a schoolteacher had reasons to ask questions that a stranger passing through did not. What she had not expected was Owen Sheridan, and the specific way his honesty undid her preparations. June arrived and brought with it the scorching weight of a Texas summer and a shift in the rhythm of Ada's days that she told herself was entirely professional. Owen came to the schoolhouse more frequently. He brought her reports of a fence-line dispute on his western boundary that she did not need to know about. He showed up at the Wednesday sewing circle, which no man attended, to deliver a jar of honey from his hives that Mrs. Prout had not requested, and stood in the doorway talking to the assembled women with the ease of a man comfortable in his own community. And Ada watched him from across the room and tried to make herself look away and consistently failed. He was not a simple man. She understood this more fully as the weeks passed. He had the outward practicality of someone shaped by land and weather and hard work, but underneath that there was a mind that read broadly and thought carefully, and he had opinions about the railroad expansion and the treatment of the Comanche bands who had been moved to reservation land, and he disagreed with the more violent voices in the territory on that matter in terms that were direct and not calibrated for popularity. And Ada found this particular quality difficult to file away in the category of professionally irrelevant. He also had a sense of humor that appeared without announcement, dry and precise, appearing in the middle of otherwise serious conversations in a way that made her want to laugh more than she permitted herself to. In early July, there was a crisis at the school. One of her students, a boy named Eli Granger whose family ranched 12 miles out of town, had not arrived for 2 days without explanation. Ada, following what she understood of her responsibilities, drove out to the Granger place in a borrowed buggy to inquire, and found a family dealing with a sick cow that had infected 3 others, and Eli's father deep in the particular desperation of a man watching a year's income potentially dissolve in front of him. She drove back through the afternoon heat, and on the main road she encountered Owen coming the other direction on horseback, and he pulled up and read her expression before she had said a word. "Granger," he said, "his cattle are sick, 3 of them, he looks desperate." Owen was quiet for a moment. "I will ride out there tomorrow," he said. "I have seen this kind of illness before. I might be able to help." "You don't have to," she said. "I know I don't have to," he said, and the simplicity of it was itself a kind of communication. He rode out to the Granger place the next morning. He stayed 2 days helping the family manage the sick animals and saving 2 of the 3. Eli returned to school the following week, and his mother came to see Ada afterward to say that Owen Sheridan had refused payment and had brought medicine from his own stores, and her eyes were bright with the emotion of someone who has been helped past their ability to articulate it properly. Ada sat alone in the schoolhouse after this conversation and admitted to herself, with the clarity of someone who has been avoiding a conclusion for weeks, that she was falling in love with Owen Sheridan. The admission sat inside her with a specific quality of pain, because she had come to Millhaven with a purpose, and the purpose had a timeline, and the timeline did not include what she was feeling, and she could not afford to feel it, and she was feeling it anyway with the unstoppable certainty of something true. She made no change in her behavior. She remained professionally warm and personally contained. But she knew, and knowing changed the texture of every ordinary interaction in a way she could not undo. In mid-July, she received a second letter from Abilene. The postmark was the same. The handwriting was different from the first letter, which was either because 2 people had written or because one person was being careful. The letter did not give a name. It said that the writer had information about a man named Voss, that the writer was willing to provide this information in exchange for consideration, and that the writer would be at the Drover's Rest Hotel in Abilene on the first Saturday of August if Ada wanted to come. She had been waiting for something like this. She had sent careful letters to contacts she had made in her 2 years of following the trail, people who had their own grievances against Voss or simply knew things about the territory that she did not. But this letter felt wrong in a way she could not completely identify. The language was too smooth. The offer of information without specific demand was not how people who actually had information operated. They led with the specific, they bargained with detail, they wanted something concrete and named. She told herself her suspicion was excessive. She told herself that she had come all this way, and she could not let caution stop her at the final step. She told herself that her brother might know something, might be somewhere in Texas, might have written to someone who had written to her. The letter mentioned, in its 3rd paragraph, that a young man matching the description she had circulated had been seen near Abilene in the spring. She had not told anyone about Caleb. She had not told anyone she had a brother who had disappeared. This information in the letter meant either that the writer had genuinely traced her through her inquiries, which was possible, or that someone had access to information about her that she had not given them publicly, which meant a different kind of problem entirely. She sat with the letter for a week and then wrote a careful reply confirming that she would come to Abilene on the first Saturday of August. She told herself she was being rational. She did not tell Owen. She almost did. There were several moments in the 2 weeks after she posted her reply when she nearly told him. He came to the schoolhouse on a Thursday to bring Pearl's forgotten lunch pail, and Ada was alone at her desk, and she looked up at him standing in the doorway with the afternoon light behind him, and the words were almost in her mouth. Almost. But she swallowed them because she did not know how to begin explaining, and because beginning the explanation meant explaining everything, and she was not sure she was ready for what his face would look like when he knew she had been living in his town under a false intention. Not a false identity. Her name was genuinely Ada Donnelly, but false intention, which felt nearly as bad. The week before she was due to leave for Abilene, Pearl came to the schoolhouse after hours with a drawing she had made of the schoolhouse and the fence and the tall cottonwood tree in the yard, and she presented it to Ada with the unself-conscious generosity of a child who has decided to love someone. "I made it for you," Pearl said, "because you are my favorite teacher I have ever had, which is two, but you are better." Ada looked at the drawing, which was careful and detailed and showed that Pearl noticed things other children missed, the way the light came through the eastern windows in the morning, the way the cottonwood leaned slightly south as if looking toward something. "This is beautiful," Ada said, and meant it absolutely. "Uncle Owen said I should give it to you before the summer break," Pearl said. "He said good teachers deserve to be appreciated." Ada folded the drawing and put it in the front pocket of her carpetbag, where she would see it every time she opened the bag, and she sat with Pearl for half an hour going over Pearl's summer reading list. And when Pearl left, skipping down the road toward the Sheridan wagon waiting at the far end of Main Street, Ada watched her go and thought about what it meant to have a thing you loved being inseparable from a thing you feared losing. She packed her suitcase the night before she intended to leave. She packed it with the systematic efficiency of a woman who had packed and unpacked the same suitcase many times, and she did not let herself look at the room at the boarding house as a room she was leaving, because that kind of thinking was a luxury she could not currently afford. She was at the stage depot at 7 in the morning, and the stage was not scheduled until 8, and she was standing alone on the platform with her suitcase when she heard boots on the wooden boards behind her. She turned. Owen stood 6 feet away, and he was not wearing his ranching clothes. He was wearing his good shirt, which she had seen him in only a few times, and he was holding his hat in both hands, and he looked like a man who had made a decision overnight that he had not been planning to make. "Owen," she said, and her voice was not entirely steady. "You are going to Abilene," he said. "How did you know?" "Bledsoe saw you post your reply to that letter." He said it without apology. "I know his postmaster told him because Bledsoe tells me things. It is a small town. I know you posted a letter to Abilene. I know the letter you received before it had a postmark from Abilene. I have been waiting to see if you would tell me yourself." The air between them felt like the air before a lightning strike, charged and specific. "I was going to tell you," she said, and the truth of it and the incompleteness of it were equally present in her voice. "Were you? After, when I came back." "If you came back," he said. "Ada," he stopped. He looked at the ground for a moment, and when he looked up his expression was the clearest she had ever seen it, all the careful steadiness he kept around himself stripped away. "I know you came to Millhaven for a reason that had nothing to do with teaching. I know you are following a man you believe is here in Texas. I know because I have been watching the same trail for 4 years, and I have been doing it alone, and I have gotten exactly nowhere. And a woman shows up in my town with one suitcase and the eyes of someone who has been looking for something for a very long time, and I have been telling myself for months that it was none of my business." She stared at him. "What do you mean you have been watching the same trail?" "Maggie died," he said, "because of Harlan Voss. And I have spent 4 years trying to find enough evidence to bring him to a judge. But he moves and he changes his name, and he uses different women in different states, and every time I think I have found a thread that leads to him, it dissolves." He paused. "But 3 months ago, someone started asking the same questions I had been asking, posting careful inquiries through the territory, looking for anyone who had evidence connecting a series of financial frauds across 4 states to a single man. That was you, wasn't it?" Ada set her suitcase down. Her hands were not entirely steady. "Yes," she said, "that was me." "Then tell me all of it," he said. "Because I think you have things I need and I have things you need, and the letter that brought you to Abilene is a trap, and I will not let you walk into it alone." She told him all of it there on the depot platform before the stage arrived. She told him about her brother Caleb and her father and the house in Augusta, and the years of following the trail west. She told him about the 2 letters from Abilene and why the second one felt wrong. She told him about the evidence she had gathered, the documentation across multiple states connecting the same pattern of fraud to a man who operated under different names, all of which she had traced to a single person, Harlan Voss. Owen listened to every word. He did not interrupt. He did not look at her with the expression she had feared, the one that said he was recalculating everything he thought about her. He listened with the focused, steady attention he gave to things that mattered, and when she finished, the stagecoach was pulling up in a cloud of dust, and the driver was calling out his departure time. "You said that letter mentioned Caleb," Owen said. "It said a young man matching his description. Voss would know you have a brother. He took money from your family. He knows everything about the people he targets." Owen's voice was level and careful. "He is using Caleb's name to get you to Abilene because you are getting close enough that he needs to neutralize you, either to discredit you, buy your silence, or worse." "Then I go to Abilene with backup," she said. "Then we go to Abilene together," he said. "And we do it right. Not on that stage where anyone watching the depot would see you leave and know your route. We go by road 2 days out with time to think and plan." He paused. "But first you need to tell me whether you trust me." She looked at Owen Sheridan, who had taught his niece to love learning after her mother died, who had ridden 2 days to help a struggling rancher, who had danced with her at the town hall and said his sister was the best of everything Pearl was, who had known something was wrong and waited with patient honesty for her to come to him instead of forcing the confrontation, who was standing here now, not demanding anything, just offering himself clearly and without condition. "I trust you," she said. This is the moment the narrative had already arrived at, the suitcase in the dirt, the coach departing without her, the words about the trap and his sister, and her own choice to walk back with him, away from the stagecoach, toward the beginning of something she had not planned for. They did not leave for Abilene that day. They spent the day at the Sheridan Ranch, in the large front room of the house that Owen's parents had built, and that Owen had added to twice since, sitting at the table with their respective evidence spread out between them. Owen's evidence was older but richer in detail. He had names, dates, locations. He had affidavits from 3 women in other Texas towns who had dealt with a man matching Voss's description. He had a letter from a federal marshal in Fort Worth who was investigating a similar pattern, but had not, as of the previous year, connected all the incidents to a single man. Ada's evidence was more recent and geographically broader. She had newspaper clippings from Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi. She had a letter from a former business partner of Voss's in Augusta, signed and witnessed, that named him specifically and described his method. She had financial documents that a sympathetic bank clerk in Alabama had made copies of, showing the movement of funds through a series of accounts that all traced back to one source. Together, the 2 sets of evidence told a complete story, not just of the pattern but of the man. Owen sat back in his chair after they had gone through everything, and he was quiet for a long moment. "This is enough for a federal judge," he said. "With both sets together, this is sufficient." "If we can present it to the right judge," Ada said. "I know a man," Owen said. "Federal Circuit Judge named Harrington. He has been through Millhaven twice. He is honest and he is thorough and he has no patience for the kind of fraud Voss runs." He looked at her across the table. "But we still need to deal with the Abilene letter. Whoever sent it knows you are close. Voss knows you are close. We cannot simply ignore it. If we present our evidence to Harrington without going to Abilene, Voss has time to move again," Ada said. "He will hear that something is coming through legal channels and he will disappear into another state." "Then we go to Abilene," Owen said. "But on our terms. With the federal marshal from Fort Worth meeting us there, with our evidence already filed with Harrington's court, and with Voss having no idea that the woman coming to meet his contact is bringing law enforcement instead of a private appointment." Ada looked at him. "You have been planning this for 4 years, she said. "I have been planning it for 4 years without the piece that made it work," he said. "Which was your evidence connecting the fraud across state lines." That is what makes this federal instead of local. Local courts he can buy or avoid. Federal courts he cannot. She thought about this for a moment. Who writes to the marshal? I will, Owen said. I have corresponded with him before. He knows my name. It will be credible. He paused. Ada. The way he said her name had changed, or perhaps she was only now hearing it clearly. I want you to know that what you did, coming this far, building this case alone, without support or safety or anyone who knew your real reason for being here, that is not a small thing. She looked away from him at the evidence on the table. I had to, she said. You could have given up, he said. Most people would have. My father died, she said, and my brother disappeared. I had to do something that made that mean something. She looked back at him. I know that might not sound rational. It sounds completely rational, he said, and there was nothing in his voice except understanding. No pity, no condescension, just the recognition of one grief by another. They had supper that evening at the Sheridan house, cooked by Owen's housekeeper, Mrs. Canfield, a formidable woman of 60 who appeared to operate the ranch's domestic life with the authority of a general and the judgment of a confessor. Pearl had been at the house when they arrived, and she had greeted Ada with the uncomplicated delight of a child seeing a favorite person in an unexpected place, and had talked without pause through most of supper about the summer reading list Ada had assigned, and a wild turkey that had appeared in the upper pasture, and the specific injustice of having to go to bed before the adults. After Pearl was in bed, Ada and Owen sat on the porch in the quiet of the Texas evening, and the stars were very bright above the flat land, and something about the combination of all of it, the honesty of the afternoon, the supper like an ordinary family meal, the child in the house, the warm, dark smell of the land, pressed against the boundaries Ada had been keeping around herself for years. I need to tell you something, she said. Then tell me, Owen said. I did not intend for any of this. She gestured vaguely, inadequately at the space between them and at the house behind her and at Millhaven and the whole of the last 4 months. I came here for one purpose. I had a plan. It was a very good plan. It did not include any of this. Owen was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful but warm. What does this mean to you? She looked at him in the starlight. It means I am frightened, she said honestly, because I am not done with Voss yet and I do not know what happens after, and I have not allowed myself to plan for after because it seemed like a luxury I had not earned. And if there were an after, he said. She let the question sit in the air for a long moment. I do not know, she said, which was the most honest thing she had said in months because she did not know and she was in the habit of not pretending she had certainty she did not have. I know that this here feels like something I did not expect to find, and that I am not certain how to hold it while everything else is still unresolved. He nodded slowly. Then we resolve everything else first, he said, and then we see. It was the right answer. It was the only answer that was both respectful and real, and Ada sat with it in the warm dark and felt something in her chest that had been wound very tightly for a very long time ease, just slightly, in a way that was both relief and terror. They spent 2 days preparing. Owen sent a telegram to the federal marshal in Fort Worth under a careful pretext that would not alert anyone monitoring the Millhaven telegraph office. He received a reply confirming that the marshal, whose name was Denton, would be in Abilene on the first Saturday of August and could receive them at the federal office there. He also filed, through a law office in a neighboring town rather than through Millhaven directly, a formal submission of their combined evidence to Judge Harrington's court. Ada arranged her affairs at the school, leaving detailed notes for whoever might substitute if she was delayed. She left Pearl's drawing in the front pocket of her carpetbag. They left for Abilene on a Thursday, 2 days before the scheduled meeting at the Drover's Rest, traveling by Owen's wagon rather than the stagecoach, taking the longer southern route that was less traveled. Owen drove, and Ada sat beside him on the wagon bench, and for the first several hours they talked about practical things, the route, the marshal, the presentation of evidence. And then, As the afternoon lengthened and the land spread out in every direction in the particular Texas way that made the sky feel enormous, the conversation drifted into other territory. He told her about his parents, who had come to Texas from Virginia in 1858 with a wagon and a plan, and the specific optimism of people who needed a new start. He told her about building the ranch from the original claim, about the years when the cattle market was difficult, and the weather was worse, and there were months when the future felt genuinely uncertain. He told her about his sister Maggie, not the grief of her death but the life of her, the brightness of her, and the way she had laughed, and her fierce belief that women were capable of precisely as much as they chose to be capable of. Ada told him about Georgia, about the house that had belonged to her parents and their parents before that, about her father's dignity and her brother's ambition, and the particular way their family had been close in the way of families that have survived difficulty together. She told him about the 2 years she had spent building her case, the places she had stayed, the people she had met, the skills she had developed for finding information without appearing to be looking for it. "You would have made a fine detective," Owen said. "I would have been very bad at the official parts," she said. "I have no patience for bureaucracy." "Neither do I," he said, "which is why I went into ranching." She laughed, and he glanced at her sideways with a look she was beginning to recognize, the one that appeared when something surprised him into being glad, and she stored it in the back of her mind, alongside everything else she had been collecting without permission. They stopped for the night at a way station run by a family named Aldrich, a couple in their 50s with 3 grown children, and a comfortable, well-run operation that offered clean accommodation and good food to travelers. Mrs. Aldrich put Ada in a small room off the main house and put Owen in the bunkhouse with 2 other travelers, and served supper for everyone at a large common table. During supper, one of the other travelers, a younger man who had introduced himself as a land agent from San Antonio, made a comment about the Apache band still operating in the Southern Territories that was conspicuously dismissive of the violence that the removal of their lands had caused. Ada watched Owen's face during this comment and watched him choose, with visible deliberateness, to respond. "The removal and confinement of the Comanche and Apache peoples caused injury that the territory is going to be living with for a generation," Owen said, in the direct, unperformative way he had of stating his actual opinions. "Men who profit from land that was taken through policy that I would not call fully just should be cautious about where they direct their contempt." The land agent looked at him. "Strong words for a rancher." "I have thought about it carefully," Owen said, "and those are the words that match my thoughts." The conversation moved on. Ada looked at her plate and felt something that had been cautious in her relax another degree. The next morning they were back on the road before sunrise, and they arrived in Abilene in the late afternoon of Friday, dusty and tired, and carrying between them a suitcase of evidence and a shared purpose, and something else that had not been named, but was present in every exchange of the last 2 days like a current under clear water. Abilene in 1882 was past its wildest years, but had not yet fully settled into respectability. The cattle drives from the south still moved through it in season, and the town retained the infrastructure of its louder past, while accommodating the ambitions of citizens who wanted schools and churches and newspapers and the promise of permanence. The federal marshal's office was on the quieter eastern end of town, past the stockyards and the 2 competing hotels, in a building that also housed a land registry office and a justice of the peace. Marshal Denton was a lean, gray-haired man of 50, with the watchful economy of movement that comes from decades of professional caution. He read their combined evidence in full, asking precise questions at precise moments, and when he finished he sat back in his chair and looked at both of them with something approaching professional satisfaction. "This is the most complete documentation I have seen of this individual's operations," he said. "The cross-state evidence is the key. I have 3 open inquiries that connect to this same pattern, With what you have provided, I can file for a federal warrant today. And if we confirm his presence in Abilene tomorrow, Owen asked. Then I serve the warrant tomorrow, Denton said, with 2 deputies and enough procedure that he cannot buy his way out before the judge sees this file. Ada looked at the file on Denton's desk, which contained 4 years of Owen's work and 2 years of hers combined. Can you confirm that my brother Caleb Donnelly is not involved in Voss's operation? I need to know whether he is a victim or a participant. Denton looked at her steadily. Do you have reason to believe he might be a participant? I have no information either way, she said, but I need to know. We will do due diligence, Denton said. If he is a victim, we will treat him as one. The following morning, Ada went to the Drover's Rest Hotel as the letter had instructed, and she went not alone but with Marshal Denton and 1 deputy 100 yards behind her at intervals, and Owen positioned with a clear sightline from the hotel across the street, and the specific, controlled composure of a woman who has prepared for this for 2 years and knows exactly what she is doing. The man waiting in the hotel lobby had the kind of easy confidence that functions as a disguise, the confidence of a man who has never been caught and therefore does not believe he will be. He was in his 40s, well-dressed, with a face that Ada recognized from descriptions she had read in correspondence stretching back across 3 states. He stood when he saw her and extended his hand with a warmth that was precise and professional and entirely manufactured. Miss Donnelly, he said, I am glad you came. Mr. Voss, she said. His face shifted just slightly in the way of someone whose performance has encountered an unexpected stage direction. He recalibrated within a second. I think you may have me confused with someone else. I don't think so, she said, and behind her she heard the footsteps of Marshal Denton coming through the hotel door. The arrest of Harlan Voss was not dramatic in the way of novels. It was quiet and procedural and deeply satisfying in the way that justice is satisfying when it is real rather than theatrical. Denton served the warrant. His deputy secured Voss before he could do anything other than look once around the room for an exit that was not available, and the hotel lobby continued its ordinary business around them, with the mild interest of people who had seen this kind of scene before in a town that had its share of history. Ada stood very still and watched it happen, and the feeling that went through her was not triumph but something quieter and more complicated, the specific emotional weight of arriving at the end of a long road, and discovering that what you feel is not relief but an immense, rearranging exhaustion, as if every year of effort is settling through you at once now that it no longer needs to hold you upright. Owen was at her side within moments of the arrest. He did not say anything. He stood beside her and let her feel what she was feeling, and the quiet solidity of his presence was exactly the right thing. Marshal Denton, in the course of the investigation that followed, determined that Caleb Donnelly had not been in Abilene. The reference in the letter had been fabricated by Voss to lure Ada, as Owen had predicted. Caleb's whereabouts were unknown, which was painful, but there was a thread, a lead from a boarding house in the territories north of the Red River, where a man named Donnelly had stayed the previous winter, and Denton passed this information to Ada with the careful honesty of a lawman who cannot make promises but can provide what he has. Voss was held for federal trial. The trial, which took place 4 months later in Fort Worth, resulted in a conviction on multiple counts of fraud across 4 states. Ada attended and gave testimony. Owen went with her. 3 other women who had been defrauded gave testimony also, women who had been found through Denton's investigation, and who came to court with the specific dignity of people who have survived something and chosen to name it clearly. But before all of that, there was Abilene on the Saturday afternoon after the arrest, and there was Owen Sheridan walking with Ada through the quieter streets of the eastern part of town, while the dust settled on what she had spent years working toward, and the question that had been sitting between them since the porch at the ranch was present with a new weight because there was no longer a practical reason to set it aside. You said you had not allowed yourself to plan for after, Owen said. Ada looked at the street ahead of them, at the long afternoon light lying across the dry ground. "I did say that. Is there an after now?" She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. She turned to look at him, and he was watching her with that direct, clear gaze that had disarmed her the first time she saw it in Bledsoe's general store, and that had been disarming her consistently ever since. And she thought about her suitcase at the hotel and the empty schoolhouse in Millhaven and pearls drawing in her carpetbag, and the porch in the dark with the enormous Texas stars. And she thought about what it means to have been alone in your purpose for so long that you have stopped noticing the loneliness because it has become indistinguishable from the air around you. "I want there to be an after," she said. "I am not certain I know how to have one. I am not certain I know how to stop moving." "You stopped in Millhaven," he said. "I stopped in Millhaven because Millhaven was in the path of what I was doing." "Did you stay in Millhaven because it was in the path of what you were doing?" She looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said. "I stayed because of Pearl and the children, and because I was teaching things that mattered, and because of you," she added, which cost her something and felt, having been said, entirely like the correct thing to have said. Owen reached out and took her hand, and it was not like the grip at the stagecoach depot. It was not desperate or restraining. It was simply steady and warm and there. "Come back to Millhaven," he said. "Not because it is in the path of anything. Come back because you choose to." She looked at their hands and then at his face. And then we see," he said, "which is what we said before, but with less immediate danger, which I think is an improvement." She laughed genuinely, the kind of laughter that is also relief, and he smiled, which was different from the other expressions she had catalogued. It was unguarded and warm and changed the whole character of his face, and she thought that she would like to see that smile regularly for a considerable length of time. "Yes," she said. "All right. I will come back to Millhaven." They rode back on the Sunday, and Millhaven received them with the equanimity of a small town that had noticed their absence and had opinions about it, but was exercising a modicum of restraint about expressing them immediately. Mrs. Prout met Ada at the door of the boarding house with a look that asked everything while saying only that supper had been kept warm, and Ada thanked her and went to her room and sat on the edge of the bed, and felt the strangeness of a life that has arrived at an unplanned destination and is considering whether to call it home. She returned to the schoolhouse the following Monday to prepare for the fall term, which was still 3 weeks away. She spent those 3 weeks in a renovation of the curriculum, ordering new materials, writing lesson plans, and spending long August evenings at the Sheridan Ranch, which she had begun to visit with a frequency that had become its own kind of statement. Owen was a man of considerable patience and considerable feeling, and he channeled both into the particular practice of courtship in the way of someone who was serious about it, which meant that he did not rush, and he did not perform, and he was simply consistently, reliably present in ways that were both practical and tender. He fixed the loose hinge on the schoolhouse door that Ada had been meaning to mention to the school board. He appeared at the boarding house on a Sunday afternoon with an invitation for a ride along the eastern boundary of his land, where the grass was high and the light in late August had a specific quality of gold, and they rode for 2 hours in the easy conversation of people discovering the ordinary terrain of each other's lives. He told her about the ranch, not as a property but as a living thing, as a set of relationships between land and weather and animal and human effort that required constant attention and constant adjustment, and rewarded both with something he was not embarrassed to call love. He had 40 head of cattle and plans to expand. He had a small horse operation that he ran with the help of 2 hired men who had worked for him for years and who were, he said, more reliable than the cattle market and considerably more opinionated. Ada listened and asked questions, and told him about what she wanted for the school, her conviction that the children of Millhaven deserved a curriculum that extended beyond the basics, that Pearl was capable of mathematics that would have challenged students in the best Eastern schools, and that the geography and history of Texas itself was a subject that could be taught with rigor and respect for the complexity of all the people who had lived in it. Owen listened to her talk about teaching with an attention that told her he found it genuinely interesting, not obligatorily interesting, and he asked questions that were specific enough to demonstrate actual engagement, and Ada felt the particular warmth of being taken seriously by someone who could have easily patronized her and chose not to. In September, the fall term began, and Ada was back in the schoolhouse with her 12 students and 3 additions, 2 children from a family newly arrived from Oklahoma Territory, and a boy from the Aldrich family at the Way Station who had decided to board in Millhaven for the school year. The schoolroom felt right in a way that Ada recognized as something she had not felt about a place in a very long time. Pearl, who had grown an inch over the summer and was now wielding long division with the confidence of someone who has decided that mathematics is personally on her side, came to the schoolhouse after lessons one October afternoon with Owen, and Owen had a particular look that Ada had learned to read, the one that meant he had something to say and had been thinking about how to say it carefully. They sat on the schoolhouse steps in the late afternoon while Pearl practiced her multiplication tables inside, and Owen turned his hat in his hands and looked at the horizon and then at Ada. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to know that there is only one right answer, which is whatever your honest answer is." "That is a very alarming preamble," Ada said. The edge of his mouth moved. "I know." He looked at her directly. "I would like you to marry me. Not because it is practical, although it is. Not because of Pearl, although Pearl thinks it is a magnificent idea and has told me so at length. Because I am in love with you, and I have been in love with you since approximately the 3rd week you were in Millhaven, and I have been conducting myself with considerable restraint ever since, and I would like to stop conducting myself with restraint and start conducting myself with actual intention." Ada looked at him sitting on the steps in the October light, and she thought about the stagecoach depot and the evidence spread on his kitchen table and the dance at the town hall and the porch in the dark and the ride back from Abilene, and she thought about what it means to stop moving and choose a place, to stop pursuing and choose a thing, to stop surviving and choose a life. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she had not seen on him before, something that was relief and joy combined in proportions that told her the question had cost him more than his careful delivery had shown. He reached out and took her hand, and Pearl appeared in the schoolhouse doorway at that precise moment, with the impeccable timing of a child who had been listening with her ear against the door, and she made a sound of pure triumph that sent 2 sparrows out of the cottonwood tree and startled Mrs. Pruitt's dog 4 buildings down the street. They married in November in the Millhaven church with the fire and brimstone pastor who turned out to have a gift for ceremony that his sermons did not fully predict. The whole town came. Mrs. Pruitt wept. Mr. Bledsoe from the general store gave them a case of preserves with a card that was signed by 12 people who had apparently organized a gift committee without telling either of them. The Granger family drove 11 miles to attend. The fiddle player who came through monthly arrived 2 days early, apparently having been informed by the community at large that his presence was required. Pearl wore her Sunday dress and served as Ada's attendant with a seriousness of purpose that was exactly like her mother, or so Owen said afterward quietly, to Ada alone, and his face was full of the complicated beauty of grief and joy coexisting. Ada wore a dress she had made in the 3 weeks before the wedding with Mrs. Pruitt's assistance, from fabric she ordered from the catalog, a blue that was deeper than the calico she had been wearing when Owen first danced with her, and she carried a small bunch of late autumn wildflowers that Pearl had gathered from the field east of the school with meticulous selection and enormous pride. Standing in the church, saying the words that changed things permanently, Ada thought about the suitcase that was sitting in the corner of the room at the boarding house, packed and ready out of a habit so ingrained that she had not realized until the morning of her wedding day that she had still been packing it every Sunday night as though departure were always the next step. She had unpacked it that morning. She had put the dresses in the wardrobe in the room she would now share with Owen. She had put her father's derringer in the drawer of the bedside table. She had put Pearl's drawing in a frame and hung it on the wall. She had left the suitcase open on the floor of the room at the boarding house, empty, unlocked, going nowhere. The winter of 1882 settled over Millhaven with the specific character of West Texas winters, cold and bright and occasional, punctuated by the kind of blue-sky days that made the world feel improbably clean. Ada moved into the Sheridan house and discovered the particular adjustments of shared domesticity, with the interest of someone approaching a new curriculum, noting which rhythms already worked and which needed negotiation, learning the specific vocabulary of a household that had been organized around one man and one child, and was now organizing itself around something more. She and Owen were, it turned out, well suited in the ways that mattered. They had compatible habits of work, both early risers, both inclined toward directness. They argued occasionally about the same things that had been present in the argument between their respective sensibilities all along. Owen's tendency to absorb difficulty privately before sharing it versus Ada's preference for naming things immediately when they arose. They learned to meet in the middle of this, which required effort and produced, over time, a way of communicating that was specifically their own. Pearl was a delight. She was also 9 years old and in possession of opinions that she delivered without apology, and she had a sharp eye for the distinction between what adults said and what they meant, and she had inherited from her mother, Owen said, the specific ability to be simultaneously right and infuriating about it. Ada loved her completely. In January, a letter arrived from a settlement north of the Red River. It was addressed to Ada and it was from Caleb. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time after reading it, and then she called Owen in from the barn. He read it standing, and then he set it on the table and looked at her. "He is alive," she said. The fact of it, unadorned, was almost too large to hold. "He is alive," Owen confirmed. Caleb had written that he had been in the Oklahoma Territory for 2 years, working on a cattle operation belonging to a man named Morrison who asked no questions about a man's past and paid fair wages. He had heard, through the particular underground of territorial gossip, that someone was looking for Harlan Voss in Texas. He had not known it was Ada. He had been too ashamed to write sooner, he said, which was the sentence that cost Ada the most to read. He did not ask to come back to her. He offered her the choice. She wrote back the same day and told him to come. He arrived in March, thin and weathered, and 6 years older than the boy she remembered, and he stood in the doorway of the Sheridan house with his hat in his hands, and his face full of the particular guilt of someone who has rehearsed what he wants to say so many times that the words have become unfamiliar. Ada crossed the room and put her arms around her brother without waiting for the rehearsed speech, and felt him hold on with the desperation of someone who had been let go of something and expected not to be held again. Owen gave Caleb work on the ranch. Not charity, not a handout, but genuine employment doing the kind of physical work that has the specific therapeutic quality of requiring your full attention. And Caleb proved, over the weeks and months that followed, to be exactly the kind of worker that Owen valued most, reliable and skilled, and quietly devoted to doing things correctly. He was 25 and still young enough that the years ahead outnumbered the years behind in a proportion that allowed for something other than regret. The spring of 1883 brought the trial in Fort Worth, which Ada attended with Owen, leaving Pearl with Mrs. Canfield, and which resulted in the conviction of Harlan Voss on multiple counts of fraud. The sentence was 8 years in a federal penitentiary. Ada sat in the courtroom and listened to the verdict and felt, when it was read, not the triumph she had imagined during the years when the goal was still abstract, but something simpler and more complete. She felt that it was finished, that the thing that had organized her grief and her anger for years had been given over to the proper authority, and she no longer needed to carry it as if she were personally responsible for its weight. On the train back to Millhaven, she put her head on Owen's shoulder, and he put his arm around her, and she slept for the first time in months without dreaming about anything she needed to resolve. The summer of 1883 was generous. The cattle prices were favorable, and the weather was manageable by Texas standards, which meant it was very hot but not catastrophically so, and the ranch did well. Ada was in her second full year of teaching, and had expanded the curriculum to include a set of advanced materials for the older students that she had ordered from a publisher in Boston, and that were causing a quiet revolution in the expectations of several Millhaven families who had not, until their children began coming home with opinions about history and science, considered that the local school might be the kind of place that produced something beyond basic literacy. She was also, by August, aware of a change in herself that she confirmed with the doctor in town, with the particular combination of joy and fear that accompanies news of that magnitude when you are very much in love with the person it concerns. She told Owen that evening, on the porch in the dark, with the stars very bright above the Texas plain, which seemed the right kind of symmetry. He was quiet for a moment after she told him, and then he turned to look at her and his face was completely open, no restraint, no careful management of expression, just a man in the fullness of what he felt. "A baby," he said. "Yes," she said. "In the spring, I think. March, perhaps April." He reached out and cupped her face in his hand very gently and looked at her with an intensity that she had by now learned to recognize as love, not its polite surface but its full reality. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Not are you glad, I can see you are glad. Are you all right in yourself?" "I am frightened," she said, "and very happy, both at the same time." "Good," he said. "That means you are paying attention." She laughed and he kissed her, and above them the Texas sky continued doing what it did, being enormous and full of stars and entirely indifferent to human events in a way that was, strangely, comforting rather than diminishing. She told Pearl the next morning. Pearl received the information, processed it for approximately 10 seconds, and then announced that if it was a girl she would like to suggest the name Margaret, which was her mother's name, and if it was a boy she would accept any reasonable option but would like to be consulted. Owen, overhearing this from the kitchen, said that Pearl's input had been duly noted and would be considered at the appropriate time. Pearl said she understood, in the tone of someone who has accepted a position of formal influence. The fall and winter passed with the specific richness of a life that has found its particular shape and is inhabiting it fully. Ada taught through November and reduced her hours in December as the pregnancy advanced. Caleb, who had by now become as much a part of the Millhaven community as his labor and his steady, quiet presence could make him, was invaluable to Owen during the winter months, and the two men had developed the kind of working relationship that becomes, over time and shared effort, a friendship. March arrived. Ada went into labor on a Saturday morning with the kind of timing that felt like a deliberate narrative decision, everything else paused and still, the ranch quiet, the weather cool but not cold, a clear sky. The baby was a boy. He was born healthy and loud, and with an immediate, forceful opinion about the indignity of his current situation, which he expressed at considerable volume. The doctor, a capable woman named Dr. Patterson who had established a practice in Millhaven the previous year, declared him perfect. Owen held his son for the first time with the careful, stunned reverence of a man who has handled many things and has never handled anything quite like this. And Ada, exhausted and triumphant and more purely happy than she had ever been, watched him and thought about a woman who had arrived in a small Texas town with one suitcase and absolutely no intention of staying. They named him James Owen Sheridan, James for Ada's father, Owen as a middle name because Pearl pointed out with irrefutable logic that it would be confusing to have two Owens in the same household, and Pearl extracted from both parents the concession that the naming of any future children would involve formal consultation. Pearl, for her part, appointed herself James's senior advisor and primary educational consultant, a role she took with the same seriousness she brought to everything, and spent considerable hours sitting next to the baby's cradle explaining things to him that he could not yet understand with the patient conviction of a future teacher. In the summer of 1884, the Federal Circuit Judge Harrington came through Millhaven on his quarterly circuit, and he stopped at the Sheridan Ranch at Owen's invitation for supper, and he sat at the table where Owen and Ada had once spread their evidence across the kitchen surface, and talked about justice and the territory and the state of the law west of the 100th meridian with the specific pleasure of a man who loves his work and finds good company in people who understand it. He told them that the conviction of Harlan Voss had been used as a precedent in two subsequent federal fraud cases, that the evidence they had compiled, particularly the cross-state documentation, had become a model for how to prosecute multi-jurisdictional fraud in the territories. He said this with the satisfaction of a judge who sees his decisions extend beyond their immediate application. Ada listened to this across the table and felt the particular satisfaction of a thing that has resonated beyond its original purpose. After Harrington left, she stood in the kitchen washing dishes in the way she had come to love, the ordinary domestic ritual of a life that is genuinely hers, and Owen came in from seeing the judge off and leaned against the doorframe and watched her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking about the suitcase," she said. "What about it?" She turned to look at him. "It is still in the corner of the bedroom. I have been meaning to find a better place for it, but I keep leaving it there." She paused. "I think I was keeping it there because I had not yet finished deciding to stay." "And now," he said. "Now I am finished deciding," she said. He crossed the kitchen and stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and he looked at her with the expression she had catalogued that first year and had never stopped finding remarkable. "We could put it in the attic," he said. "We could," she said. "Or we could give it to Caleb. He might need it." "He might," Owen said. "He has been talking about looking for work in San Antonio. I think he wants to try something of his own." "Good," Ada said. "He should." She looked at Owen. "I will miss him." "He can come back," Owen said. "People come back to places they love." She thought about arriving in Millhaven on a Wednesday in the spring of 1882 with a suitcase full of secrets and a plan she had constructed with tremendous care and every intention of leaving. She thought about the teacher's salary and the schoolhouse with the loose hinge and Pearl with her arithmetic and Owen in the doorway of Bledsoe's store, and the dance at the town hall, and the evidence on the kitchen table, and the arrest in Abilene, and the wedding in November and James crying his opinions at the ceiling in March, and all of it. The whole accumulation of an unplanned life that had turned out to be precisely the life she wanted. "Yes," she said. "People come back to places they love." She gave the suitcase to Caleb at the end of July when he left for San Antonio with a reference from Owen, and a set of contacts in the cattle business that Owen had spent 2 weeks quietly assembling. Caleb left on a Tuesday morning, on the same stage route that Ada had almost taken to Abilene the previous summer, and he hugged Ada at the depot with the fullness of everything they had not said to each other for years finally settled between them. "Write to me," she said. "Every week," he said. And he meant it, and she knew he meant it. She stood at the depot and watched the stage pull away in its cloud of dust, and Owen stood beside her with James on his hip, the baby who was now 4 months old and had recently discovered that he could grab things and was applying this discovery comprehensively to anything within reach. Pearl stood on Ada's other side because it was summer and Pearl was rarely anywhere else. "He will be fine," Pearl said, with the certainty of 9 years of observing how things went. "He will," Ada agreed. Owen shifted James to his other hip and looked at Ada with the private warmth that was different from his public warmth in the specific way of a look that is only meant for one person. Ready to go home, home. She had lived in houses before. She had lived in the room at the boarding house and in the small house behind the schoolhouse in Georgia and in the family house that had been lost. But home, the word as it sat in Owen's voice, meaning the ranch and the house and the classroom and the town and Pearl and James and the man saying it, was something she had not had in so long that its weight surprised her still, pleasantly, every time. "Yes," she said. "Ready." They turned away from the depot together, the four of them, and walked back through the main street of Millhaven in the summer morning light, and the town received them the way it received its own, which was to say with the specific warmth of a place that has recognized someone as belonging to it. The suitcase was gone. She had nothing to pack and no intention of packing it. In the fall of that year, Ada returned to full-time teaching, bringing James with her to the schoolhouse for the first months in a basket near her desk, which the students received as a fact of life with the easy adaptability of children who are primarily interested in what they are learning. Pearl, now 10, had informally appointed herself James's classroom protector and made it known to the other students that her cousin's sleep schedule was to be respected during lesson time. The school grew. By 1885, there were 23 students and a second teacher, a young woman named Clara Holt from Austin, who arrived with her own single bag and a set of qualifications that Ada found immediately impressive. Ada took on the role of lead teacher and curriculum designer with the natural authority of someone who has been doing the job well for 3 years and has earned the trust of the community by visible and consistent excellence. Owen expanded the ranch. The second horse operation, which he had been considering for 2 years, became a reality in the spring of 1885, and Millhaven found itself with a reputation in the regional cattle circuit for producing sound working horses at honest prices, which Owen managed with the combination of patience and principle that he applied to everything. In the spring of 1886, Ada found out she was expecting again. She told Owen in the evening, on the porch, which had become their habitual place for things of significance, and Owen put his arm around her, and they sat together in the comfortable, specific silence of two people who have built something real and know it. "Pearl will want to be consulted on the name," Owen said. "Pearl always wants to be consulted on everything," Ada said. "It is one of her best qualities." "It is one of her most exhausting qualities," Owen said with great affection. "Those are usually the same thing," Ada said. The baby was born in November, a girl, and Owen held her in the lamplight of the bedroom and looked at Ada with the same stunned reverence he had brought to James's arrival, and Ada thought it was remarkable that a man could be surprised by love in the same way twice. They asked Pearl about the name. Pearl deliberated for 2 days and then announced that she would like to suggest the name Clara after Miss Holt, who Pearl considered an excellent role model, but that she was also open to Margaret, which had been her original suggestion. They discussed it as a family, all four of them around the kitchen table, James contributing by banging a spoon on the table at regular intervals, and they settled on Eliza, which was Ada's mother's name, with Margaret as a middle name for Pearl's mother. Eliza Margaret Sheridan entered the records of Millhaven, Texas, in the winter of 1886, and proceeded to make her opinions known with a forcefulness that James acknowledged by looking at her with the respectful wariness of an older sibling who has met his match. Caleb wrote every week. He had found work at a stockyard in San Antonio and had written in the spring of 1886 about a woman named Helen Reyes, the daughter of a cattle broker, who he had met at a church social and who was, he said in his careful, slightly formal written voice, the finest person he had ever met. Ada wrote back encouraging every possible development with an enthusiasm that she felt Owen reading over her shoulder as she wrote. By 1887, Caleb and Helen were married, and Ada and Owen traveled to San Antonio for the wedding with Pearl and James, leaving Eliza in the care of Mrs. Canfield, and stood in a church in a city that smelled of different dust and watched Ada's brother marry with the expression of a man who has been given back something he thought was permanently lost. On the way home, on the train, with Pearl asleep against the window and James resolutely refusing to sleep in the way of a 3-year-old who has determined that consciousness is a moral obligation, Owen sat beside Ada in the warm rocking of the passenger car and looked at her with the expression she loved most. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "I'm just looking at you." "You are always looking at me," she said. "I know," he said. "I do not intend to stop." She leaned her head on his shoulder and looked out at the Texas landscape passing in the early evening light, the flat land and the long shadows, and the enormous sky doing what it always did, being vast and indifferent, and somehow exactly the right backdrop for the specific private life happening inside the small bright window of the train car. She thought about the woman who had come to Millhaven with one suitcase and a purpose and a plan, and absolutely no room for anything that was not the plan. She thought about how the plan had been good, had been necessary, had gotten her to where she needed to be, and had also, in the process of being executed, been comprehensively overtaken by something it had not accounted for, by the particular stubbornness of a rancher who could not let go of what was right, by a 9-year-old girl with her mother's gift for numbers and her own gift for knowing who deserved to be loved, by a classroom of 12 children, now 23, who were learning things that would matter for the rest of their lives, by a porch in the dark and a waltz at the town hall, and a table covered in evidence, and a stagecoach she had not gotten on because the man standing in the road had told her the truth. She had come to Millhaven with one suitcase. She had left when she left, not with the suitcase but with Owen Sheridan, who had refused to let go in the very best and truest sense of not letting go, the kind that holds without confining, that stays without demanding, that loves without needing the person it loves to be anything other than exactly what they are. The train moved through the Texas evening. Pearl shifted in her sleep. James finally, with the sovereign air of someone making a concession, closed his eyes. Owen's hand found Ada's in the space between them on the bench, and he held it the way he had held it in Abilene, steady and warm and entirely sure. Millhaven was 3 hours away and full of ordinary, irreplaceable things. A school with 23 students, a ranch with 40 cattle, and a horse operation that was becoming known in the territory. A house with a porch and a kitchen table, and a bedroom where a baby girl was sleeping under Mrs. Canfield's watchful care. A community that had, over 5 years, become the kind of community you think about when someone asks you where you are from. Ada closed her eyes and felt the rocking of the train and the warmth of Owen's hand, and thought about nothing in particular and everything at once in the pleasant, undirected way of someone who is no longer running towards something or away from something, who is simply, and sufficiently, and finally, on the way home.